This is David Rovics with a song for today. One songwriter's take on the history of the world, one song at a time. Available wherever you get your podcasts. The history of deadly U.S. interventionism in other countries dates back to the years immediately following the American Revolution, and it has continued unabated ever since. Earlier on, the invasions of other countries, or the efforts to sabotage the economies of countries in other cases, were usually related to U.S. efforts to maintain the critical institution of human bondage, of enslaving other people for profit, the central economic institution on which the U.S. was based in the beginning, along with real estate speculation. Later, the defense of U.S. interests broadened, so that it was no longer about defending outright slavery, but defending governments the U.S. supported, where workers were paid the least by the most brutal rulers so that U.S. corporations who owned so much of the land and resources could pay the workers as little as possible, and pay the corrupt rulers as little taxes as possible. These sorts of corrupt arrangements are obviously very fragile, based on rule by use of force, but not even rule by local elites, but only a certain weak form of local elite that existed mainly to serve the interests of those who pulled the strings in Washington, D.C. This is the kind of government that more and more guerrilla movements were forming to resist back in the 1960s. And in some cases, radicals were coming to power through the ballot box, as was the case with Dr. Salvador Allende in Chile. Efforts by the U.S. authorities, as represented at the time by renowned geopolitical strategist and war hawk Henry Kissinger, to undermine the Allende government, started right away. After years of economic sanctions, arranged shortages, sabotage by the CIA and their local allies among the U.S.-trained officer elite within the Chilean military, the global press was full of proclamations that society in Chile had collapsed under the socialist government, and the military was going to take power and restore order. Society had not collapsed, and the military did not restore order. They initiated decades of rule by torture, under the protection of Washington, D.C. The military coup in Chile began on the morning of September 11, 1973.
As I looked out my window at the clear blue sky, at the planes that flew so low, at the smoke that rose so high, the air filled up with dust that blackened out the sun, and the politicians went on about the new day that had begun. And when I looked at my calendar, I knew it would be so. It was on this day in Santiago. Less than 30 years had passed, and how clearly I remember what the city had been like before that day in September. There were doctors on the sidewalks helping those in need, students in the barrios teaching children how to read. There were milk trucks in the shanties driving to and fro. On this day in Santiago, I could tell you about the rallies, the whole city in the street. The president was speaking and we all were on our feet. Allende was the future, destitution was the past. The city was in motion and things were changing fast. Just how fast they were changing, only Kissinger could know. On this day in Santiago, Anaconda Copper and Nixon got their dream, a country torn apart, ruptured at the seam. A fascist coup was what they wanted, and that's just what they'd get when they sent down from Fort Benning General Pinochet. Lady Liberty hung her head down low. On this day in Santiago, they dropped bombs on La Moneda with jet planes from D.C. They killed 5,000 people in our city by the sea. A reign of terror started when they cut off Victor's hands. The rivers clogged with bodies and our blood drenched the sands. And I remember wondering which way future winds might blow. On this day in Santiago.
This has been a Song for Today from David Rovics, making popular education popular again. If you go to davidrovics.com, you can hear lots of other episodes of this and other podcasts, see where I'm touring next, and get on my email list. You can also click on CSA there on my website and join my community-supported art program, which is mainly how I get by in the free streaming era. I hope to see you sometime soon again here on the internet or on the road and hopefully in the streets.